If you are lost in the sauce about the National Sabbath Proclamation by President Donald Trump and all the discussion surrounding it, you are in the right place if you're trying to catch up. I didn't know what was going on, so today we're doing the deep dive. I'm going to answer the 5 W's in relation to the National Sabbath Proclamation, how it bleeds into the National Prayer Mall event, and then we'll cover 3 main groups and their reactions to the National Sabbath Proclamation. And lastly, if you stick around to the end, we're going to discuss how it all relates to the image of the beast spoken about in Revelation chapter 13. We're going deep today, friends. Right now, a major conversation is unfolding across America regarding religious freedoms, our history, and the sacred rhythms of faith that connect us to the Almighty. But there's a massive twist to this story that very few people are talking about, and that being the foundation is being laid to support the image of the beast. We're going to learn how a routine National Heritage Month just transformed into a historic conversation about a nationwide day of rest and what it truly means for the future of our country. What exactly is a Jewish American Heritage Month? So it predates President Trump. This is an annual recognition observed every single May in the United States. It is a special time dedicated to celebrate the history of contributions made by Jewish Americans, and is supposed to raise awareness to combat anti-Semitism and prejudice. Listen, friends, don't kill the messenger. I'm just giving you the facts, all right? I'm just covering the truth with you as it stands right now today. You could agree or disagree with it, have your own opinions, so be it. That's not our purpose and intent of this video and our time together today. The history and the origins of the observance go back several decades, believe it or not. It began in 1980 with Jewish Heritage Week. So it began as a week. Congress passed a bipartisan resolution, believe it or not, authorizing the president to designate a week in April or May to celebrate Jewish heritage, and President Jimmy Carter issued the first proclamation. Then in 2004, the nation marked the 350-year anniversary of permanent Jewish life in America. The Jewish Museum of Florida and South Florida community leaders successfully lobbied for a full Heritage Month. By Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Senator Arlen Specter, President George W. Bush officially proclaimed May as Jewish American Heritage Month in 2006. It has been proclaimed annually by every single president since. A total of 4 U.S. presidents have issued these official annual White House proclamations. Because the month requires an annual executive action to recognize each year, every sitting president since its inception has consistently signed and issued a proclamation every May. So that's President George W. Bush, that's President Barack Obama, and President Obama also hosted the first ever White House reception specifically honoring Jewish American Heritage Month in May of 2010. Then President Donald Trump issued proclamations during his first term from 2017 to 2020. Then President Biden followed suit. He also issued 4 annual proclamations during his term from 21 to 2024. And President Trump has resumed the practice upon returning to the office. This includes the highly discussed May 4th, 2026 proclamation that introduced the brand new Shabbat 250 initiative. This brings us directly to the massive story unfolding right now. What is Shabbat 250? Why is it called Shabbat 250? Let's explain the 250 part first. From the foundation of our country in 1776 to this very year of 2026 is exactly 250 years of U.S. history. So that explains the 250. So Shabbat 250 is saying Jewish contribution to the United States has gone on for all of the 250 years of the nation's independence. Again, please do not kill the messenger. But the Shabbat portion is what has made President Trump's proclamation this year historic. On May 4th, 2026, President Trump issued the official annual White House proclamation for the Heritage Month as expected. But this year's document introduced a specific actionable initiative called Shabbat 250. I quote, "In special honor of 250 glorious years of American independence and on the weekend of Rededicate 250, a national jubilee of prayer, praise, and thanksgiving, Jewish Americans are encouraged to observe a national Sabbath from sundown on May 15th to nightfall on May 16th. Friends, families, and communities of all backgrounds may come together in gratitude for our great nation. This day will recognize the sacred Jewish tradition of setting aside time for rest, reflection, and gratitude to the Almighty. So the proclamation frames the concept of the Sabbath not just as a religious obligation for one group, but as a foundational tool for the nation's well-being. It encourages people of all backgrounds to unplug, reflect, and appreciate the religious freedoms that are foundational to the United States. So the United States government is encouraging a national day of rest and worship, no? And before the hairs on the back of your neck stand up while you are thinking, isn't that a violation of the separation of church and state? Don't forget, American presidents have a long history of invoking faith and declaring national days of prayer. Look at Thanksgiving, for example. In 1789, President George Washington issued the first National Thanksgiving Proclamation, explicitly calling for a day of public thanksgiving and prayer to God. So why is this proclamation being seen as something completely unprecedented? This marks the first time a sitting U.S. president has officially called for the observance of what is being termed the Jewish Sabbath, also known as Shabbat. I say termed because Christ said the Sabbath was made for humanity in Mark chapter 2, verse 27. Historically, governmental interaction with the Sabbath have centered strictly on legal protections and religious accommodations. For example, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 protects an individual's rights to observe Saturday as a day of rest without facing employment discrimination. But a proactive presidential endorsement of the seventh-day Sabbath as a focal point for a national milestone is entirely new territory in American political history. Because this proclamation steps directly into the intersection of federal authority and religious practice, it has sparked a wide spectrum of powerful reactions across the nation and different communities. We can break these groups down into three major groups. The first group is the Jewish community and their response. There is some prophetic excitement being felt deeply within Orthodox and conservative communities. Major Orthodox and politically conservative Jewish organizations have embraced the declaration wholeheartedly, with thousands of families signing online pledges to observe the day over on Shabbat250.org, believe it or not. Many commentators and rabbis view this as an extraordinary historical milestone and sign for favor. From the Jewish perspective, for thousands of years, Jewish history has been shaped by foreign governments that limited, taxed, or completely banned Jewish traditions. Because of this, having a president of a global superpower officially recognize the Sabbath, using precise Jewish legal terms, and noting the exact time from sundown to nightfall is seen as a massive historical shift. Furthermore, within certain traditional circles, it has sparked discussion surrounding a famous teaching in the Talmud from Shabbat 118b. This teaching suggests that if the house of Israel were to properly keep the Sabbath together, the Messiah would arrive. Shabbat 250 was seen by some as an unprecedented catalyst towards that kind of unified observance and a potential for massive spiritual revival. The second group of reactions is a wave of political and constitutional backlash from progressive and civil rights sectors. They voiced intense criticism, viewing the move as a highly calculated political maneuver. Critics argue that the White House is blurring the lines between church and state, overstepping constitutional barriers or boundaries by using executive power to promote specific religious rituals. Much of the negative feedback stems from the fact that Shabbat 250 was explicitly paired with Rededicate 250. Rededicate 250 was a massive 9-hour prayer festival on the National Mall scheduled for the very next day after Shabbat 250 on Sunday, May 17th. Critics point out that the Sunday event was heavily funded with public dollars and openly promoted by faith advisors as an event built explicitly on Christian value. Progressive critics argue that Shabbat 250 was essentially used as a token inclusion or political cover to insulate the administration against charges of exclusive Christian nationalism. In other words, it's a Trojan horse. Yet, despite the intense internal debates, the proclamation successfully pushed the ancient concepts of the biblical seventh-day Sabbath directly into the modern national conversation, turning a routine Heritage Month into a widely debated, highly historic weekend. Before we move on to our third group, this brings us to the core legal question at the very heart of American liberty. Does the United States government have the right to encourage or legislate a day of worship? This question sits at the center of American constitutional law. To answer it, legal scholars, historians, and the courts look directly to the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which strictly states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. This single sentence contains two distinct clauses, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. Together, they create a strict, unyielding boundary for what the government can and cannot do regarding religious days. The law draws a sharp line between legislating, which means forcing, and encouraging, which means proclaiming. First, can the government legislate a day of worship? The answer is a definitive no. The federal government absolutely does not have the right to legally mandate, coerce, or legislate a specific day of religious worship for its citizens. Forcing citizens to observe a specific day for worship or attend a religious service would be a textbook violation of the Establishment Clause, as it would effectively establish a state-sanctioned religion. Furthermore, compelling a citizen to observe a holiday that goes against their personal conscience or faith violates the Free Exercise Clause. Forcing a Muslim or a Jew to legally recognize Sunday or forcing an atheist to recognize any holy day violates their constitutional right to freely practice or not practice their religion. But you might be asking yourself, but what about blue laws and Sunday laws? Yeah, you're right. There are historical loopholes known as blue laws or Sunday closing law. While the government cannot force you to worship, the United States Supreme Court has historically allowed governments to mandate a secular day of rest. In the landmark 1961 case, McGowan versus Maryland, the Supreme Court ruled on the state laws that required certain businesses to be closed on Sundays. The court ruled that while these laws originally had religious roots, their modern legal purpose was secular. Come on, man. Gotta be kidding me. That purpose was to provide a uniform day of rest, relaxation, and family time for workers to protect labor welfare. Because the law did not force anyone to actually go to church, it was deemed constitutional. Let me just add here, we have 6 out of 9 of our Supreme Court judges that are Catholic today, right now, for whatever that's worth. Moving on to the next group. The third group of reactions comes from alternative religious outlets, independent Christian ministries, prophecy-focused commentators, and eschatology heads and prophecy watchers like myself. And we have some escalating concern. The phrase National Sabbath has triggered massive waves of speculation, specifically within groups like Seventh-day Adventists and independent eschatology ministries. The proclamation raised immediate red flags and sparked fear of a national Sunday law to follow a national Sabbath. These groups point directly to and within the proclamation where the president appeared to broaden the scope, stating, I further call on all Americans to celebrate their faith and freedom throughout this year, during the month, and especially on Shabbat to celebrate our 250th year anniversary. Wow. For these prophecy watchers like myself, the state officially stepping in to define, encourage, and structure a weekly holy day, even when framed as voluntary encouragement rather than coercion, is viewed as dangerous, a stepping stone to set up a precedent that we don't want to see in our country. The fear that's being actively discussed in these circles is that if the government can declare a Saturday national Sabbath for a political milestone, it lays the structural groundwork for future legislated days of rest, which I believe could eventually lead to a federally mandated Sunday law or blue law, just like we saw attempted in 1888. The Blair Sunday Rest Bill, S.2983, introduced on May 21st, 1888 by Senator Henry W. Blair of New Hampshire, aimed to enforce Sunday as a national day of rest and religious worship across U.S. territories. the District of Columbia, and within interstate commerce and federal systems such as the post office and military. The effort to defeat the 1888 Blair Sunday Rest Bill was led by a diverse coalition of religious minorities, secularists, and even civil liberty advocates. However, the historic pushback is defined by a few key leaders who successfully turned public opinion and convinced the Senate committee to kill the bill. The two primary figures who led the charge to beat back the bill include Alonzo T. Jones, the principal opponent and a Seventh-day Adventist, and Dr. Abraham H. Lewis, a Seventh-day Baptist. Praise God for these men, because I believe God raised them up to protect our religious liberties. And with that said, this brings us right to the image of the beast question. The image of the beast in Revelation chapter 13. In verse 11, John the Revelator says, "And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth. And he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon." John says, "And I beheld another beast." Let's first define what a beast is. The Bible defines a beast as a king or kingdom. See Daniel 7, verse 17 and verse 23. So we have two beasts in Revelation 13. It says, "And I saw another beast." Now I'm a Protestant, okay? And the historical Protestant understanding is that the first beast of Revelation 13 is none other than Vatican City, headed by the Roman Catholic papacy. Rome, headed by the papacy, those line of popes. Classic historical Protestant understanding. The second beast has been open for discussion for quite a while, but Protestants in the mid-1800s understood the second beast to be the United States of America, being led by radical Christianity. And as we saw in verse 11, this beast has two horns. A horn represents a king or kingdom or governing power, but these horns are lamb-like. Friends, you can read your Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and the lamb is only a symbol for one thing, one person, and that is Christ. We're dealing with symbolism in the book of Revelation. So we have another nation coming to power out of the earth, not out of the sea, a place of lower population density, right? And diversity. It's a Christian nation, has Christ-like mannerisms, Christ-like foundations, and it's coming up in the 1700s. I only know one nation, friends. I only know one nation. But it said in verse 11, "It spake as a dragon." When a nation speaks, that's legislating. Remember, out of one side of this beast's mouth, it said freedom and liberty for all. But out of the other side of his mouth, a slave was 3/5 of a man. So yet, while it promoted freedom and religious liberty, it also spake as a dragon. Roger Williams had to go to Rhode Island in order to get true religious freedom because he was being persecuted by the other Christians who had just escaped persecution from the papacy. How true these words are. "And I saw another beast with lamb-like horns, but it spake as a dragon." And we move on to verse 12. "And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth," everyone's involved, friends, "and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed." The power that was exercised by the first beast was a religio-political power. The church controlled the state within the first beast. So that means the second beast is looking to do the same thing, to exercise the same power, to have the church in charge of the state. This is what we would call today Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism says that the United States of America is founded on Christian principles by Christians, is a Christian nation, and that the United States government has a responsibility to keep it that way. Well, how do governments do anything? They make laws, they legislate, they enforce through might, through power. This is a church-state relationship. This was a serious problem in the Dark Ages and Middle Ages, which is why this country even became what it is today, because Puritans and Europeans fled for their religious freedom and lives. Friends, a history we forget or don't know is one we are destined to repeat, and we're well on our way. I want you to notice in verse 12, we have a stately power enforcing false worship. We've seen this before in Babylon. Spiritual Babylon is just like literal Babylon. In Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar set up an image. He legislated false worship, and there was a death decree. Then we get to the lion's den under the Medes and the Persians. They legislated false worship, and there was a death decree. Don't forget that. All the earth is involved. Doesn't matter if you're Muslim, doesn't matter if you're agnostic, atheist, if you're Jewish, Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox. Everybody is involved. Rich, poor, free, bond. We better be ready, friends. The first beast's deadly wound is being healed. So again, the second beast will exercise all the power of the first beast. And we read in verse 13, and he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which they had power to do in the sight of the beast. So it's not just legislation that's used, but spiritualism, supernatural wonder-working power is also combined to lead the world into this worship. Ask yourself, there's so much division religiously in the world. So many people believe so many different things. How can we ever come to a place of agreement? Well, friends, supernatural activity will help and aid to make that happen. In verse 14 said that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword and did live. In verse 15 says, and he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak, legislate, friends, and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be unalived. The image of the beast is the problem. We're not covering the mark of the beast in this episode, but the image of the beast causes, speaks. What is the image of the beast? The image of the beast, the first beast, was a religio-political power where the church controlled the state. That's its image. That's how it looks. That's how it functioned. The second beast, the United States of America, being led by radical Christianity, wants to recreate that same image, that same beast, that same type of system, a religio-political system, where the church, again, where Christianity, supposedly, professing Christianity, will be in control over the state. Friends, this is a very easy thing to see happening. As secularism, as the LGBTQ community, as Islam, all push in around the United States of America, right-leaning evangelicals are fighting back, and they're going to overcorrect, friends. Remember, the pen is far mightier than the sword. They're not taking to the streets with arms and war and violence, but they're in legislative halls fighting there to make sure that the United States of America doesn't lose its Christian values. And if need be, they'll legislate Christianity on us. In 321 AD, there was Sunday law. In the colony of Virginia in 1610, there were Sunday laws with a death decree. In 1888, they tried to pass another Sunday law. There is a global Green Sabbath initiative around the world. Friends, we are headed exactly where prophecy says we are headed. And the image of the beast is now being erected. Radical Christians in the United States want to get to a place where Sunday law is legislated and that Christianity is the national religion. In summary, let's restate the constitutional facts as they exist today. First, legislating mandated worship is strictly forbidden by the First Amendment and is entirely unconstitutional. Second, legislating a secular day of rest is constitutional as long as the goal is labor, welfare, and not forced religion, as proven by McGowan versus Maryland. Third, issuing voluntary proclamations is entirely constitutional and is protected as historical acknowledgement and executive expression. This includes our long-standing traditions of Thanksgiving, the National Day of Prayer, and this year's Shabbat 250 initiative. And we're walking a tightrope, friends. We are walking on the line of the separation of church and state like it's a tightrope. But this delicate balance is exactly why recent proclamations use very careful, specific language. The text states that citizens are encouraged to observe rather than ordered to observe. But Bible prophecy foretells a day when it will no longer be a suggestion, but a law that will come with a death penalty if violated. Our government will cross the constitutional line into the deep, dark waters of state-mandated religion. Maranatha, are you ready? Peace. I'm out. I'll catch you in the next one.
In the secret place of the Most High God above.